Today we will be learning about story structure. We will take an adventure through a story identifying the beginning, middle, and end of a story. This is our story structure. All stories have a beginning, a middle, and an end. A story is like a roller coaster. It starts at the bottom, which is the exposition where we learn about the characters and setting. Next, it rises to the climax or middle of the story, where the highest part of action takes place, where a story takes a turning point and then goes to the bottom of the roller coaster to where the story finds resolution. The story we will be working with to go over the beginning, middle, and end of a story will be Humpty Dumpty from Super Simple Songs. We will be using the words and images from Super Simple Songs to go over our story.
Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall. Humpty Dumpty had a great fall. All the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put Humpty together again.
The beginning of a story is where the characters and setting are introduced. Beginning includes who, when, and where. The story we are working with was Humpty Dumpty. What was the beginning of this story? Let's take 5 seconds to think about that. The beginning of a story is when the settings and character are introduced. Our main character is Humpty Dumpty, and our setting is the wall. The middle of a story is where the plot develops and tells us what is happening. This is where the bulk of the story is and where the turning point of the story happens. Remember, we are looking at the story of Humpty Dumpty. The beginning of our story was where we were introduced to our character, Humpty Dumpty, and our setting, the wall. Now, take 5 seconds to think about what the middle part of our story is. The middle of the story is where Humpty Dumpty falls off of the wall. This is a turning point because it's a major event that happens in the story and it changes the character's journey. The end of the story is where the story comes to a close. This is where the character comes to a solution. This is where the character learns a lesson, resolves their problems, or comes to terms with the events that have happened. In Humpty Dumpty, the beginning of our story was Humpty Dumpty sitting on a wall. The middle of our story is where the story develops and Humpty Dumpty has a great fall. With those being the beginning and middle of our story, what is the end of our story? I'll give you 5 seconds to think about that. The end of the story gives us a conclusion. The conclusion of this story is that the king's horses and men were unable to put Humpty back together. With the consequences of him falling off the wall, he had to come to terms with not being able to be put together again. How can we identify the beginning, middle, and end of a story? The beginning of the story introduces our characters and setting, which is like the beginning of a roller coaster, where you are slowly going up the hill and you begin getting familiar with it, just like you begin getting familiar with a story. The middle of the story is where most of the story is happening. This is where our story develops and action occurs. Just like on a roller coaster, it is a turning point because you begin to go faster and head towards the bottom of the hill. The end of the story is where our story comes to a conclusion. Just like a roller coaster, this is the end of the ride, where it slows down and you must get off. This is where the character comes to a solution, just like you come to a solution on whether or not you liked the roller coaster. A lot of stories are longer than Humpty Dumpty, so the beginning, middle, and end of the story may be longer than what we had in our example. Students, it is now your turn to watch the next video below and determine the beginning, middle, and end of the story. There will be questions after the video, so be sure to pay attention and go answer those questions. Remember, you can always go back and watch the video again.